Hi, it's Rachelle Abbott. Welcome back to Tech and Science Daily.
3, 2,
What do we know about President Donald Trump's vision for US space exploration?
we have liftoff.
A SpaceX launch there, and not just any. It was one which saw Donald Trump attending alongside Elon Musk prior to his second term as president.
Ready for that boom, Kate.
Down to 3 engines.
In his inauguration speech, Trump spoke of the US pursuing its goal to get humans on Mars.
And we will pursue our manifest destiny into the stars, launching American astronauts to plant the stars and stripes on the planet Mars.
He also recently issued his first direct order to Elon Musk to rescue NASA astronauts Sonny Williams and Butch Wilmore, who flew last year to the International Space Station aboard a Boeing Starliner and were left stranded. Trump claimed the pair had been abandoned by the Biden administration after they docked at the ISS last June. But can President Donald Trump advance America in the space race? And how strong is his relationship with SpaceX founder Elon Musk? To find out, we're joined by the London Standard's science and technology editor Will Hosie, who has a piece out in this week's edition of the paper and online titled Why Donald Trump and Elon Musk Could Fall Out Over SpaceX. Will, to kick off, what do we know about Trump's vision for US space exploration?
He loves it. Trump loves space. I think for him, as for many Americans, it's a great point of national pride that they were the first to land and walk on the moon. Trump himself, I did the maths earlier, would have been 23 at the time of the Apollo moon landings. It's likely it would have been an event that sort of marked him. What we do know and can corroborate is that when he was president, he put space back on the agenda. When he was president the first time, I think it was in 2017, he resurrected something called the National Space Council, which is an office in the White House that had been shut down in 1993 by Bill Clinton, and on which he and the vice president sit along with a few other important people, not Elon Musk, which is important for later on. Trump initiated something called the Artemis program, which is the name given to NASA's mission to fly to Mars via the moon, or not so much via the moon as flying to Mars, but first flying to the moon to kind of test the technology that will then take us to Mars, in theory.
And what has Elon got to do with it?
So Elon Musk is also a key stakeholder in the space race via a little company he owns called SpaceX. The company's goal has always been to establish a human colony on Mars. It was the stuff of science fiction. Now it seems wholly possible, although perhaps not quite within the timelines that Elon Musk has set for himself and for his employees. SpaceX was founded in 2002, and I'm pretty sure it passed a market cap of $350 billion earlier this year, so in January, effectively, making it the biggest startup the world has ever seen. It's still privately owned. Musk owns a 42% stake in it, and I think that alone accounts for something like 35% of his net worth.
How could Elon Musk and his company SpaceX affect America's advance in the space race?
The current plan, as discussed, is to use the moon as a test run for the technology that's being developed to fly humanity to Mars. Elon Musk wants to do away with that. Over Christmas, he tweeted that the moon was, quote unquote, a distraction. His approach, similar to that of SpaceX, has always been high risk, high reward. Internally at SpaceX, they refer to this as a rapid iterative approach, which is code for move fast and break things. They don't do nearly as much ground testing as, say, Boeing, which is another contractor with NASA, and another kind of massive sort of space tech and aviation company. SpaceX prefers test flights. Now, I think there's a lot of merit to a high-risk, high-reward strategy when it comes to the space race. I don't really see us going to Mars without a high amount of risk. But Elon Musk is such a high threshold for risk and so much money to back himself in that department that he's sort of shooting for the stars in order to bypass the moon, both metaphorically and literally. He's vowed to take a chainsaw to what he sees as red tape and is strongly opposed to regulatory overreach. And as head of the government efficiency, he's basically been given the right to axe things that he deems unnecessarily expensive or, frankly, just unnecessary, and to direct the government to spend its money where he sees fit. With that kind of capital behind him, he could very feasibly redirect the race to Mars away from the moon. But for where I'm standing here on planet Earth, I only see that plan as throwing a spanner in the works and actually delaying America's ascent to Mars, which I do not think is in Donald Trump's interest at the ripe old age of 78.
And what now for NASA's relationship with SpaceX? And is there any conflict of interest?
Yes and no. So SpaceX is one of NASA's many contractors, although it's been accused by the likes of Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin, which is another big aerospace company, of monopolizing government contracts. Back in 2014, when NASA was deciding which contractors to go for crewed missions, it was between SpaceX and Boeing. But for reasons that I don't really have time to go into here, they decided to award both of them contracts based largely on the idea that this would spur competition and drive progress. In recent years, this has worked out in favor of SpaceX. In January, like I said earlier, it was valued at $350 billion, whereas Boeing reported its second biggest ever annual loss in 2024. So NASA is becoming more reliant on SpaceX, which looks like the technological leader in the race to Mars and is one of the primary contractors, specifically in the Artemis program, which could leave it open to manipulation by Musk, particularly now that one of Musk's allies, a guy called Jarek Isaacman, is in charge of NASA. So Isaacman is a private astronaut. He's a billionaire entrepreneur who made his money in the late 90s when he sold a digital payments company at the age of 16. So you know the type, like Musk, daredevil, thrill seeker, high risk, high reward. And the NASA chief gets appointed by the president, assuming that the president wants to change whoever's in charge when he or she takes office. There's no rule against the NASA chief staying the same. Obviously, Trump loves the changing of the guard, so there was no way there wasn't going to be a change in that department. Despite Musk not sitting on the National Space Council, as mentioned earlier, he has been advising Donald Trump pretty directly on space matters, given how much skin he has in the game. And insiders say that he personally requested that Trump nominate Isaacman. What we can expect is for those two men to work together hand in hand, by which I mean Musk can totally twist Isaacman's arm so that Isaacman begins to back the let's ditch the moon plan. In theory, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but it could.
Has Isaacman expressed any opposition to the plan?
Isaacman so far hasn't expressed any opposition to the moon plan. He's actually quite in favour of it. But he is also what one journalist has called a Musk quote-unquote mini-me. And what he certainly has been is something of a guinea pig for SpaceX. In 2021, Isaacman led the first private or civilian team to ever orbit the Earth, which was a mission completed aboard a SpaceX capsule at a personal cost to Isaacman of $200 million. And he more recently bankrolled something called the Polaris Dawn mission, which carried him on a SpaceX rocket to an elliptic orbit 870 miles from the Earth, which was the furthest anyone has ever been since NASA's Apollo program. You know, it passed through the Van Allen radiation belt. The idea was to test, among other things, the quality of SpaceX extravehicular activity spacesuit, or the EVA spacesuit, and to try a new cost-saving protocol to exit and re-enter a spacecraft without using an airlock.
Let's go to a quick break. Make sure to give this podcast a follow and a rating. We've already seen technology such as rovers being parachuted onto the Red Planet. How realistic are Musk's plans to travel to Mars?
They're realistic, but the timelines are deluded. So it's not that it's not going to happen. I'm personally quite enthusiastic about the whole idea, but it's almost definitely not going to happen nearly as soon as Musk wants it to. So he has spoken of planning uncrewed missions to Mars by SpaceX by 2026. There was a very good article written by someone called Dr. Robert Zubrin in a journal called The New Atlantis a few weeks ago. And he is also opposed to using the moon as a kind of proxy test. He's also pro, let's just go straight to the Red Planet. Even he says that 2031 is a more realistic arrival date.
And what does this mean for Musk's relationship with Trump?
So some have been led to believe that Musk is on thin ice at the minute, ever since he's come out against Trump's plans for AI in America. There was a big tech infrastructure project announced a few weeks ago called Stargate, which effectively passed up Elon Musk and his artificial intelligence company xAI in favor of OpenAI, which Musk used to own, co-founded, no longer owns, and is now suing. You can also read all about this in an article I wrote a couple of weeks ago on the London Standard. Basically, the long and short of it is that Musk and Trump are slightly at odds on that particular point. there's good reason to also think that conflict brewing around the Artemis mission could, worsen things and make things more tense between the president and effectively his top consigliere, which, effectively would put an end to the most fruitful political alliance of 2024 and one of the most fruitful and extraordinary we've seen, or I've certainly seen in my lifetime.
Why? Could we go a bit deeper there?
So with the nomination of Isaacman, the Trump administration has already thrown NASA into something of a crisis. Whistleblowers told Ars Technica that morale at the agency is at an all-time low. The interim administrator, Janet Petro, who's in charge until Isaacman has his Senate confirmation hearing, which should happen at some point this month, is currently purging, all mentions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Announced 2 weeks ago that a guy called Michael Altenhofen, who's a former SpaceX head of human spaceflight programs, has been appointed as a senior advisor to Isaacman. And insiders at NASA are talking about literal SpaceX takeover. If Elon Musk were to sort of twist Isaacman's arm and redirect efforts away from test flights to the moon before going to Mars, Congress could try and block this on the basis that China is trying to do the same, and American lawmakers aren't going to want China to sort of get a head start on the moon, if that makes sense, or sort of usurp territory that they see almost as their sort of like God-given right as belonging to America. Now, where Trump falls on this is what's interesting. He could side with Congress. He could just as easily side with Musk. For him, the race is not so much against China as it is against time. His second term will also be his last. It would, in many ways, be in his interest to throw his weight behind Musk if the promise of Martian landings by 2029 were at all realistic. But experts are dubious, and advisors are likely to tell Trump that putting America first means reminding Musk who's boss. Now, Musk may believe in high risk, high reward, and Trump may be similarly bullish, but at age 78, I should think that the thought of his legacy is more imposing, and shooting for the stars too suddenly could actually compromise America's lead in the space race. I don't think that's something that Trump is going to want to give up.
And that's Tech and Science Daily. Make sure to pick up a copy of this week's edition of the London Standard to read Will's article in full, or visit standard.co.uk. This podcast returns tomorrow. See you then.